Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and this is going to be part 2 of my grand Q&A experiment. So basically what I'm going to do is continue from where I left off after part 1. And so the first question for part 2 of the Q&A comes from Friendly Web Slinger, who asks, what direction would you like to see Warner Brothers take Batman after The Dark Knight Rises? Less realism, more comic booky stuff? And yeah, that's actually right in line with my thinking on it. I'm kind of an anomaly in that I like and accept all the different versions of Batman. I know there are certain Batman fans out there who starkly contrast each other. That is to say, some hold to the 60s version as being the all-time version, some hold to the Tim Burton version, some hold to the Schumacher version, and of course some hold to the Nolanverse version as being the all-time best. And I'm quite an anomaly in that I like all of them. I think they all work on their different levels. And one of the greatest things about Batman in that aspect, I think, is that you can really reinterpret how you handle this character and what kind of world he exists in based on all these different styles he's been done in. And they all work for, the time and place they were made. So, but to answer your question more directly, I want to go back about 2 weeks ago to maybe a month ago now. There was an article on comicbookmovie.com, I think, that somebody had made these poster mock-ups of what the next era of Batman on film might look like. And I thought some of these ideas were really interesting as far as casting goes. One of the ones that stood out to me was Robert Downey Jr. as the Joker. I thought that was an interesting idea. But the one that stood out the most to me was Michael Fassbender potentially playing Bruce Wayne. And, because I'm a writer and sometimes I don't even realize I'm doing it, immediately, because it was kind of like an interesting choice. I didn't immediately see him as Bruce Wayne, and so my mind, without even realizing it, started concocting, well, how could that work? How could this, and I've done this too with Star Trek and Doctor Who even, whenever there's a sort of plot hole in a story or a discrepancy in the story, my mind, again, sometimes without my even realizing it, tries to fill that in, tries to figure out a story explanation for what's going on. And so in thinking about Fassbender potentially playing Bruce Wayne, I concocted a sort of loose movie synopsis, which I then later posted on my Facebook page attached to a picture of Fassbender that I thought was the closest approximation of looking like Bruce Wayne. And, from the get-go, I said this should really feel like a much more comic book type of feel, like a surreal feel to it. It shouldn't feel like the real world. And I think I even said, this is the black and gray suited Batman who, when he goes out and he fights these thugs and whatever, his life is really on the line. It's not armor. It's not all these fancy gadgets like James Bond. Here is a cat who really has this thirst for justice and bringing down the criminal element and whatever, and his life is on the line. He's not a superhero. So the idea that, what would drive him so much, so passionately, to keep going out night after night, putting his life on the line to keep justice alive and that kind of thing, I thought that was an interesting aspect. Also, with the story I came up with, was that, as I say, this would be a very surreal world. It would be a sort of murder mystery in that these women are being continually kidnapped and then found dead later on. And the main baddie of the piece would be, let me put it to you this way. The way I constructed the story would be in the aspect of, like, say the Riddler were the bad guy in the movie, rather than going the 60s route or even the 90s route where the Riddler would leave these elaborately written riddles that Bruce Wayne would be the only one who could figure out, it would be more of a sort of, like Batman comes upon a crime scene, and he would look at the crime scene, and because of his almost Sherlock Holmes level of intellect and detective work, he would see things about the crime scene that the average, Gotham detective wouldn't. And these would be clues purposely for him. And so he would be led from one clue to the next as bodies continue to crop up. At some point, he would be led to a sort of, what can I say, a sort of twist in the story where we think we found the big bad of the piece. And I remember back when I think this was just after The Dark Knight, or maybe during Dark Knight. There was a lot of debate about the Riddler showing up in the film, in the next Nolan film. And two of the primary names I heard attached that people wanted to see were Robin Williams and David Tennant from Doctor Who. And both of those ideas struck me as being really interesting. I would have been down for either. So in this particular aspect, I thought, let's kind of do that. Let's get both of them. And so there would be a point in the film, like toward the middle of the piece, or maybe 3/4 of the way in, where Batman thinks he's got the big bad of the film cornered, and it is Robin Williams. And you think he's the Riddler, but as it would turn out, it would actually be the Toyman. And the latest victim would have been killed, and Batman beats the bloody hell out of Toyman and incarcerates him. But yet again, this isn't the real big bad of the film. So everything would stalemate at that point, and he would go to Commissioner Gordon for the first time, seeking advice or seeking help. And it would be around this time that Harleen Quinzel from Arkham Asylum, who's still very much not Harley Quinn at this point, but there is a certain underwritten malevolence to her, would come out of the works, and it would turn out she was the latest kidnapped, but she managed to escape. And the question would be hanging in the air, did she escape on purpose, or was she let go, to get the next clue to Batman and so forth? And that next clue would be that Vicky Vale, Bruce Wayne's girlfriend, was the next kidnappee, if you will. So this basically would lead to a showdown between Batman and the real foe in the piece, which would be the Riddler, as portrayed hopefully by David Tennant. And the Riddler, kind of in, not really an homage, but kind of like a similar take on what they did with the Schumacher version of the Riddler in Batman Forever. It would be very much a life and death situation, only the Riddler is so mad with his intellect that he would have chosen a mind game for Batman. Now, as I say, what would really play, deep into this story would be the seeking for justice, the quest for justice. With how much passion and drive there is in Batman, the Riddler would see this and thus make it a life and death choice between himself and Vicky Vale, Bruce Wayne's girlfriend. At some point, he would have to figure out that, Bruce Wayne is Batman. And so basically it would be, are you going to let me, the Riddler, die and lose your answer to what was going on with these crimes, what the truth behind it all is, or are you going to go and save the love of your life, that type of thing? And through the course of some fisticuffs, we would find out the real reasons behind all of this, and it was like a really crazy mind warp reason that I wrote, and I'm to save time here, I'm not going to go into all of that. But essentially the film would end with both the Riddler and Vicky Vale seemingly dying, and the reason I say seemingly is because when Bruce Wayne would get back to Wayne Manor, he would see a message from her not 5 minutes before he entered the door, saying that she was about to arrive later that evening. And so it's a big WTF. Wait a minute, we just saw her die, how is she alive? And the last shot of the film, after Bruce Wayne opens a package which contains a little vial, which plays into what all the murders were about that I said I'm going to skip over for this, with a little card on it that would have a drink me thing hinting at potentially the Mad Hatter for the sequel. He would look in a mirror and see Harleen Quinzel's face pointing back at him. And essentially, as I say, the entire gist of the film would be not so much the mindset of the criminals, but the mindset of Bruce Wayne, and how on the edge it is from sanity to insanity. And it would be a lingering question by the end: is Bruce Wayne sane or not, or is he not? And so, like I say, I think a more comic book feel movie is definitely the way to go. And I can't believe I rambled 10 minutes on this. But I hope that answers your question, Friendly Web Slinger, and anyone else who's listening. And I'll be moving on to the next set of questions from my good friend, Matrix Lord 212. He asked a real lot of questions here, and most of them are Star Trek related that I can see. I'm probably not going to get to all of them for time constraints. I don't know. This may end up being 3 parts, but so his first question is, how do you explain Data being alive in All Good Things, the last episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, when he dies at the end of Star Trek Nemesis, the final Next Gen movie? I assume he means the sort of alternate future, where in that there were multiple timelines in that episode, and I assume he means the future Data, and I kind of already answered that in my description of it. I think they even say that in the episode, that that timeline, that future timeline where Picard is kind of going senile, and you know, you have Riker as the captain of the Enterprise. It turns out Beverly Crusher, they had been married, and now she's the captain of another ship, and all of this stuff was an alternate timeline. It was, very simply put, one possibility. It did exist for a little while at the hands of Q, and you know, that whole story element of you know, the backward traveling through time anomaly and so forth in that episode. But they basically said at the end of it that this was just one possible future, and events were already differing by the end of that episode. So that's basically all it was. It was alternate timelines. The second question is, what happened to the Voyager crew after the final episode? We know that Janeway became an admiral. Well, basically, other than in Nemesis where we see her that she has become an admiral, obviously there is nothing to go on. That is to say, unless you are a fan of Star Trek fiction like I have become. There is a great, you know, novel series. It was a trilogy put out by author David Mack called Star Trek Destiny, and I effing love this series, as well as another one he created which was set in the original series era called Vanguard. But basically Destiny shows us, in a nutshell, let's put it this way, it shows us that what happened after that last episode of Star Trek Voyager was that the Borg were not wiped out. They were not once and forever destroyed, as we were kind of sort of led to believe. They really didn't delve too much deeper into that. What we find out is the Borg Queen is alive and well, and she has gone very much from a sort of Cyberman-esque, you know, assimilation of the human race mindset. She's gone more a Dalek-esque extermination mindset. It is now that she believes the human race to be, you know, to be a never-ending thorn in her side, basically, and the only way to wipe that out is by exterminating them all permanently. And so we find out that Janeway, at some point, I didn't actually read the book this takes place in, but at some point Janeway is killed, I think at the hands of the Borg Queen. As for the rest of her crew, they do survive onward. Tuvok has gone on to be the first officer of Riker aboard his ship, and you know, there are other characters I can't think of off the top of my head. I think Chakotay became the captain of Voyager, and Tom Paris, I think, is still on there. B'Elanna eventually had her child, and in one book, a Star Trek Voyager book, I believe it is, I can't think of who wrote it, you know, their daughter is either kidnapped or has to go into hiding because there's this Klingon prophecy that names her to be a god and so forth, and just really, really great fiction taking off from where these series, you know, finished. Even characters from Deep Space Nine, you know, there was the whole Dominion War and everything like that, and we have Ezri Dax is the captain of her own ship now, and you know, so on and so forth. I mean, a lot of great storytelling, and basically what that trilogy did was it took characters from all of these eras, even the Enterprise era, and so it's a conglomeration of all these characters, what basically happened, and this is all set post-Nemesis. So if you like reading and you like Star Trek, you definitely, I cannot highly recommend enough these books. Writers like, you know, David Mack, Dayton Ward, Kevin Dillmore, you know, all of them. They are just doing phenomenal work set within the Star Trek universe. And so, once again, I see that I am nearing the 15-minute mark. I've really been rambling here answering these questions, and I'm going to have to cut it off here. I definitely hope you will stick with me for parts 3, and, you know, otherwise, I hope you're well, so I'll catch you later. Peace.